World on your Android and Apple mobile devices.
The Simple Truth, rising up to explore the difficult topics of real life. Join us as we proclaim the good, the true, and the beautiful with the simple truth of Jesus Christ and His Holy Catholic Church through Scripture, tradition, and the Catechism. And now, your host, Jim Havens.
It is great to be back with you on The Simple Truth. We consecrate everything to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the pure, strong heart of St. Joseph. Today is Testimony Tuesday, where we bring you real, live, first-hand testimonial accounts of the life-giving reality of Jesus and His Catholic Church. Our guest today is Tom Walton. He is a Catholic engineer, a chemical nuclear plastics engineer, also an inventor, an advanced materials business founder and incubator. We'll get to all the good work that Tom's been a part of as we go, or at least some of it as we go, and a lot of the good work that he has brought forth and is bringing forth in terms of just doing good for our Lord in the world. And that's going to dovetail nicely into a show that we're going to have Tom on for actually next week for Catholic Family Men Monday as well. We'll get to all of that as we go today. But first, Tom Walton, thank you for being with us. How are you today?
Too blessed to be stressed, Jim.
Yes.
Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm intrigued to hear a man of such scientific learning as yourself, as such an advanced scientific mind, how he goes about parsing his personal testimony and presenting that for us today. So I'm excited for this. But Tom, I got a chance to talk with you when we were in Boston for the National Men's March to Abolish Abortion and Rally for Personhood in October. Very impressed in meeting with you. Very excited to have you on today. And we always begin here at the beginning. Let's begin with your childhood. What was your early life like, your family, the culture that you grew up in?
Well, I'm named after my grandfather, whose name was Thomas Cody, a first-generation Irish immigrant. And he actually married a real Irish immigrant from County Cork, Sherkin Island, County Cork, my grandmother. And they're really the root of my Catholic faith. And I learned recently my grandfather, Thomas Cody, again, who I'm named after, whose patron saint is Thomas More, St. Thomas More of London. He was actually a Third Order Franciscan. And it wasn't brought up much when I was young, but I learned of that recently from my parents. And unfortunately, I lost both my parents over the last couple of years. My father 2 years ago and my mother just a year ago. And I have to say that I could not have had better parents. They really did their best. Although my father was actually a Lutheran, he was a non-practicing Lutheran, and my mother was Catholic. And with the Catholic marriage, of course, my father had to agree to have all his children brought up as Catholic. I'm one of 7 siblings, and I grew up, my father also was a chemical engineer, but I grew up pretty much surrounded by a working dairy farm in Beacon Falls, Connecticut. It was run by the Betkoski family, both 2 brothers that actually had very large families. One had 9 children, one had 13. And I grew up thinking there was more cows in the world than there are people, because our little 2-acre plot was surrounded by this working dairy farm, hundreds of acres of dairy farm, and hundreds of cows, dairy cows. And it had pigsty, huge chicken coop. A lot of corn was grown, as silage. They had some of the best hay you can imagine with alfalfa and so on. And I grew up with my older brother working on this farm. Even though my father was a young chemical engineer, was working with U.S. Rubber down there in Naugatuck, Connecticut. And I was very privileged to come to Boston one time to actually meet my grandmother. And again, her husband had passed away before I was born, and the family was there, to tour around Boston. And I remember my father asked if I would be willing to take care of my grandmother, who was in her 70s at that time, and she was actually she came here as an immigrant at like 14, 15 years old, and apparently was doing some of the most menial jobs you can imagine at Mass General Hospital. But at night, she learned through a nursing school that they had at night in the Boston area. And by the time she retired, she was the top nurse at Mass General Hospital, the maternity ward. The maternity ward, Jim. We're talking about during the time in Boston where there was a huge birth rate going on. Well, that was my grandmother, the supervisor of that maternity ward. Well, anyway, my father asked if I would mind protecting her on one of her regular rounds, and I really wasn't sure what it was all about as a young 18-year-old, but I thought, wow, this is great. I get to be a knight and protect my grandmother, and I was a country boy, and Boston was very strange, these noises and what have you. So I found a stick, and my grandmother went on her regular rounds. And you might remember as we were marching, 3 miles there from the abortion mill on Beacon Street. Mm-hmm. As we were passing near around that tunnel, there was a bunch of alleys there, and they've been gentrified. They're kind of upscale now, but back then they were the most depressed areas of Boston, just between the Boston Public Library and the Charles River. Well, we took the trolley over to that area around the Boston Public Library, and my grandmother had a bag, and she went down these alleys and was nursing these, mostly winos and most all men, all cut up. They were, homeless men, a lot of them drunkards, in really bad shape. And I quickly learned that my grandmother knew them all by name, because on her regular rounds, and again, this is a retired nurse in her 70s who used to do this, the same thing she was doing at the hospital on her own in the streets of Boston. So I saw there at an early age what a real Catholic does. And that's kind of the roots of my faith, I have to say, along with my godfather, who actually was an electrical engineer, MIT-trained electrical engineer, devout Catholic, who had a wife who was my mother's wedding maid of honor. Very beautiful woman. So I'm very blessed to have these two as my godparents. And even today, from my whole family, there's nobody except my godparents who are still alive and myself that still have the faith, solidly have the faith. Again, from these experiences, from my grandparents and my godparents. My godfather, Gene Gansel, again, he was an electrical engineer, and his job was to do all the electrical engineering on the Apollo lunar module, what was called the LEM, LM, lunar module. And I'm not sure if you've seen the movie Apollo 13.
Sure.
But it was the LEM, that lunar module, since the liquid oxygen tank blew up, there was a short in that liquid oxygen tank that was the main fuel, one of the two main fuels required for that main engine to get the astronauts safely back to Earth, around the moon and back to Earth. But without that oxygen, they couldn't do it. So the engineers in Houston quickly figured out, do we have anything on the ship that they can use to get back to Earth? And well, they figured out that the lunar module rocket engine was supposed to land on the moon and get them back, back to the command module. They could fire that and possibly get them back to Earth. It was never meant to do that, but they figured it had the thrust, and if they fired it long enough, they could get it to work. Well, that's exactly what they did. And by the way, it was Jim Lovell astronaut Jim Lovell, who was commanding that Apollo 13 mission. He is a devout Catholic also, by the way. They tried it, and it was by trial and error. The first time they didn't get it right, they didn't get the course right, but they were on roughly the right direction. Then they made a course correction. They tried it again. Again, this is the lunar module, the LEM, which my godfather did the electrical engineering for, that got them back. So, as you can imagine, this made a huge impression on me. I also had a cousin, an extremely brave cousin. In fact, you look this name up on the web, you'll get hundreds of hits. Lieutenant Raymond Enners, two N's, E-N-N-E-R-S. Lieutenant Raymond Enners. You throw that in the Google search, and you'll get hundreds of hits. His name is connected with the Heisman Trophy of lacrosse, the sport of lacrosse. He played college lacrosse at West Point and made such an impression on his classmates, and in particular one of his best friends, who happened to be a Catholic by the name of Tom Pettit. And he actually wrote his obituary, which is right now on the West Point website. Well, Cousin Ray actually taught me how to play lacrosse, and he also taught me how to deal with bullies in a way that has helped me not only in Boston as we were doing the men's march, but on a lot of the pro-life activities I've been doing for quite a while.
Wow, outstanding. Tom Walton is with us. He's going to have more on his personal testimony here when we get back. But sounds like surrounded by a lot of good people in his early life. I think a lot of great witnesses there, but the one that really stands out is his grandmother going and serving in the alleys, giving that authentic witness of what it means to be Catholic, and a real act of charity there. Just phenomenal. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
The Station of the Cross thanks our supporters who have enabled us to broadcast Catholic programs for more than 20 years. As a nonprofit lay organization financially independent from your diocese, our apostolate is listener-supported. Through your generosity, we are able to inspire countless listeners with the gospel message and help lead them to a parish to be spiritually nourished by the sacraments. Thank you for your continued support, and may God bless you and your family.
Are you holding on to an old car or truck because you think dealers won't want it? Then consider donating it to the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network. This is a great way to turn your unvalued vehicle into a powerful gift for Catholic radio. You'll be taking part in our evangelization efforts to continue spreading Christ's love throughout the world. Our Lord uses Catholic radio to draw more people to Himself, and one of the best ways to support the Station of the Cross is by contributing to our vehicle donation program. The process is safe and simple. Your generosity will greatly benefit our mission to bring the truths of the Catholic faith to countless listeners. To find out more or to donate your vehicle today, visit thestationofthecross.com or call 1-866-628-CARS. That's thestationofthecross.com or 1-866-628-2277.
Our bumper magnets are a great way to promote the gospel as proclaimed through Catholic radio. We hear all the time from new listeners who were introduced to the station through a bumper magnet. We'd be happy to send you a bumper magnet so that others can come to know our Lord. Just go to thestationofthecross.com and find our bumper magnet request button under the About tab. That's thestationofthecross.com under the About tab.
Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here. Testimony Tuesday. Our guest today is Tom Walton, a Catholic engineer, inventor, and advanced materials business founder and incubator. Blessed to have him with us today. And we left off still in your early life, Tom. I want to get into some of your experience with your peers and different important decision points that you had in your early life, but I always want to try to follow the sacramental grace as well. So just wanted to ask you real quick, it sounds like you would have been baptized as an infant. and then probably in grade school at some point, first penance, first confession, receiving first Holy Communion, confirmation at some point. Do you recall anything, any stories in terms of your early life and the sacraments that you would want to share with us?
Yes, I was baptized and made my first Holy Communion at St. Francis Church in Naugatuck, Connecticut, not too far away from Beacon Falls in the Naugatuck River Valley in Connecticut. And I actually went all through Catholic grammar schools and high school, right through high school, and pretty much made my confirmation very late in grammar school. And there was a huge problem with the drug rock counterculture that crept up around that time. And my dear grandmother, the one that really hit the mark as far as works going along with faith, and of course, I think it was James, without works, faith is dead. Well, my grandmother hit the mark with her daily activities, which I saw up close and personal. And some of the doctors that I met that knew of her, one doctor, Dr. Donovan, mentioned she was one of the hardest working nurses that he'd ever seen at Mass General Hospital. And there was other similar comments like that. And I could go on with a lot of heroic things that she did. There was my pastor at St. Francis had a stroke, right in the middle of a Mass, and she was right on the scene in a very crowded church, and gave him the medical attention that he needed right away. But there's a lot of stories like that. But there was a big problem when my grandmother died in 1974. My mother, to her credit, pretty much brought us to church and followed the regular sacraments, the regular Catholic duties right up to about that time. But unfortunately, my mother's faith was never that strong. The best way to put it is she was kind of a New York Times cafeteria Catholic, if I could put it that way. If it wasn't in what she saw as the best source, she really didn't go for it. And apparently, she also knew, and my father knew, there was problems in the church at that time too, and that didn't help. But at the same time, I was hanging around with probably the greatest group of guys you can imagine. Most of them were older than me, but they came from Bristol, Tennessee, and they were probably the hardest working men that I've ever seen. They were entrepreneurs in the Taylor family from Bristol, Tennessee. They came up north and they set up an auto body shop. One brother, patriarch, set up the straightening and bending and banging part of the shop, and the other brother ran the paint shop. And in their free time, after work at night and evenings, they used to build these stock cars, these NASCAR stock cars. One was for short track dirt racing. In other words, an oval track that had dirt. Really, it was Georgia clay was the surface that you'd race on. It was called dirt. The other tracks that we raced at most, from Thompson, Connecticut down to Martinsville, Virginia, were asphalt oval tracks. Those were the most fun, and those were where we really excelled. We didn't have a lot of money, but we built these cars from the frame rails up, and that's where I learned pretty much every stage of mechanical engineering, from welding, tubing bending, sheet metal. And although I was probably the youngest member of the group, I pretty much had shown my mettle in supporting the team, so they really included me as part of the team. They knew I was a Catholic, and you have to understand, these guys were teetotaling Southern Baptists. They didn't drink. And this is a time period in which I was pursuing a young girl in our neighborhood, stunningly attractive, beautiful girl in our neighborhood, through a couple of years. In fact, I became friends with her older brother just to try to make her my girlfriend. And then, of course, as years went by, there was this Woodstock and counterculture, this drug rock counterculture that crept in, and her older sisters were into that. And she kind of slipped from this beautiful, straight-laced, gal that I fell in love with, and fell into this drug rock counterculture. And I remember she started pursuing me because I think she knew I had an interest in her for years. And it was one night, he says, "Tom, you want to come out and smoke pot with us?" Well, it was an extremely difficult decision, but I knew that my teetotaling, NASCAR, stock car racing friends would shun me if I was ever to get involved in anything like that. Drinking, not alone pot. Pot would, I'd be the lowest form of life if I was ever caught with these guys. And why were they so against alcohol, drugs, so and so? Well, I quickly learned anything that slows you down in stock car racing, like alcohol or pot's even worse, or any kind of drug, anything that slows you down makes you a terrible driver, especially at the big tracks, the long tracks like Talladega, Alabama, which is 2.5 miles, almost a constant 200 miles an hour for 500 miles for the cup race. Your response time has to be extremely fast. So I quickly made up my mind this was not for me, and that kept me away from this drug rock counterculture group, which swallowed up a lot of people. At least a third of the Catholic students that I was going with, they fell into a lot of that, mainly alcohol, but the pot, so and so. Luckily, I never got involved in that, and in fact, if I did, I never would have had the top secret security clearance that I later had, that led to a whole bunch of contracts that I had. So these teetotaling Southern Baptists, they helped shape my life in a big way. They also made me very, a fanatical NASCAR fan, but also a team member for a winning NASCAR stock car team that started winning races, winning a lot of races on the short tracks, again, from Thompson, Connecticut down to Martinsville. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite tracks is... sorry, go ahead.
Tom, just to jump in here, I'm wondering, it's such a great example of good brotherhood and how important that is, that you had good friendship that was leading you in the right direction, that helped you in a time of great temptation. It was a big factor in helping you to overcome that temptation and to choose the good. That's the strength of good friendship and good brotherhood. But I also have to ask in this, it makes me wonder, these guys were if they were solid Southern Baptist guys, what prevented you from saying, you know what, these guys are great guys. This is a great team. These are great friends. I better just become Southern Baptist as well. What prevented that from occurring?
We never really discussed religion, although they knew I was Catholic. What they were more interested in is how, they already saw, as I, from 16, 17, 18 years old, as I was working and building these cars, they knew I knew my stuff. So I just from work is what these guys measured. That's how we measure each other. How can you support the team? What skills do you have that can make a difference? And how dedicated are you to help win the race? And these were the key things that were really going through my mind as a young, stupid teenager, of course, much more stupid than I am now. But the topics never came up, and I saw that they had a strong faith, but I really didn't know the nuts and bolts of their religion because they never really mentioned it. I just knew that they were all, the fathers and the children, they were all entrepreneurs. They were self-starting. They had tremendous self-discipline. And I just wanted a piece of that because I wasn't seeing that in the Catholic group that I hung around with. But there was I already knew what a strong Catholic is supposed to do. Although it was rare, that's what I already knew what a real Christian was. Now, I didn't see that kind of heroic going on with my Southern Baptist friends, but there was something similar to that there.
Yeah, compelling. Okay, so connect some dots for us, Tom, as life moved forward. Where did you go next as a young person? You spent some time on having a great experience there, part of that team, and doing great work and learning a ton of stuff. I would imagine that at some point you would have found your way into higher education. What was that discernment like? And even in those times, you mentioned one young lady that had caught your attention. Was there any sense of discernment of vocation? Did you ponder, Lord, are you calling me maybe to religious life, to be a priest? Are you calling me to married life? Were those questions kind of swirling and part of your prayer? How did things transpire?
Yeah, I knew from an early age there that I wanted to marry that girl. Until she declined, I wanted to make her my wife. She was sweet. Until that change, she had everything I was looking for as a young man. And luckily, through my college years, and that's another part of the story. But my father was a chemical engineer. He wanted me to become an electrical engineer because his best friend and my godfather were electrical engineers. He says, Tom, what about electrical engineering? Chemical engineering it's dirty, it's dangerous, so and so. But I saw some of the things he was doing. These polyester resins, which he helped pioneer in. What are these resins? These are basically the glue. Most of you have heard of what the Sunfish sailboat is. That is a design that was originally wood, but my father in Waterbury, Connecticut, helped convince these wood boat builders to try out fiberglass and polyester resin, which is the glue that holds the fiberglass together in a Sunfish sailboat. So his technology really thrilled me, much more than what my father was trying to push me in electrical engineering. Plus, he said it's dangerous, it's dirty, whatever. I didn't mind dangerous and dirty. I was already doing that in the stock car racing world. Didn't bother me at all. So I followed and became a chemical engineer initially. And nuclear engineering also, I wanted to learn about that. And naturally, it swayed me over toward that direction.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Tom Walton is with us. Fascinating personal testimony today. We'll be right back with Tom. And one thing that jumps out to me here is just the sense of understanding science, going deep in science, understanding that there's a way things work. There's truth in science. You do this and this happens. The same is true in the spiritual life, the Catholic faith. We're going to be back with Tom. Stay tuned.
This is Life News Radio. I'm Jim Anderson. 10,000 people in Malta turned out Sunday calling the government to withdraw legislation in Parliament that could force Malta to accept abortion. Loose language in the legislation is similar to that which has opened other nations to elective abortion, something which over 90% of Malta's citizens oppose. Canada calls medical killing MAID, or medical assistance in dying. Its advocates now want involuntary killing of the mentally ill without consent. Seeking to justify this expansion, they are bragging about one doctor in Vancouver who has taken the lives of over 400 Canadians. This is Life News Radio. The View, the accurate view of the human person, changes everything. The news you hear and see pertaining to the human person has the power to inform or misinform your opinions and what you do with the gift of life and what you allow your government to do. It's why we at this station offer news on the life issue. We hope you will carefully assess what you hear, read, and view. This is Life News Radio. Tuesday's Georgia U.S. Senate runoff election will determine the shape of the U.S. Senate and how it handles abortion legislation. Incumbent abortion-friendly Senator Raphael Warnock is still bragging about his abortion support and the contrast between him and challenger Herschel Walker. And Nebraska's Attorney General is hunting for the abortion clinic who offered an abortion to a 12-year-old without protecting the girl and reporting the case to authorities as required by law. Having testified to her own abuse in the court case that sent her parents to prison, the girl is reportedly recovering well in foster care and may soon be adopted. For pro-life headlines delivered to your email address daily, sign up at lifenews.com. This has been Life News Radio.
Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Tom Walton, sharing some of his personal testimony with us today. He's a Catholic engineer, an inventor, an advanced materials business founder and incubator. And we left off, Tom, in your college years. I'm wondering, as we go back into that a bit, you strike me, Tom, from talking with you, just a great example of a solid Catholic man who's striving to be a Catholic man, just simply be who you are, whether you're at work, at play, at prayer. A real integrity of life just seems to strike me as a very natural thing for you. You just are a Catholic man. You're living it at all times in all that you do. Was that something that was already forged in you by your college years? Was that still developing? Tell us more about your college years.
Yeah, definitely. It was forged in there right at the beginning there. And again, I'd be seriously shamed by, my NASCAR stock car racing buddies if I was to steer in any other direction. Plus, they learned I was interested in college, and they cheered me on because nobody in that team had gone to college. We ranked ourselves from the work we did, and they really cheered me on, especially the patriarchs of this family. Again, the Southern Baptists cheered me on. And I went to a 5-year university. It had a co-op program. Being one of 7.
I think we lost a connection with Tom. Oh, there we go. I think he's back. Go ahead, Tom. We lost you for a moment.
Okay. Yeah. So I went to a 5-year college, and it was a co-op program there. And I was very fortunate to actually work in a chemical plant, the Griselli plant, DuPont's Griselli plant in Linden, New Jersey, a working chemical plant. And it might seem like hell to somebody who doesn't know the chemical industry, but for a young engineer, it was a dream come true. I also worked at 2 different nuclear power plants and got to see a pressurized water reactor and a steam reactor, a GE nuclear power plant, and a Westinghouse nuclear power plant completely taken apart and put back together again during a refueling outage. And it was probably the greatest experience I could have to learn all this stuff up close and personal. And once you learn about these technologies, and these are technologies that God's left us to find and use for our benefit, okay? It can be used for evil, but can also be used for benefit. And many people that are a little scared of science, they forget that. But the more you learn in science, the more you can discern for yourself what is good and what is bad, and the good that it really can do. And we're not meant to be slackers. We're meant to find new technologies that allow human beings to do more and better, to allow farming to be not 10 times more productive, but 100 and 1,000 times more productive from the technology and the machinery that you can use to make more food for more population. And just discovering new sources of material. I learned recently that of the thousands of asteroids out there, an astrophysicist from Goddard Space Flight Center taught me that some of those asteroids are pure carbon. So forget about, the shortage of materials here on our planet. We've got all these materials, an infinite amount of materials right at our grasp. That tells me there is no limits to growth. There's only limits to the creative thinking of the human mind, the creativity that God's given us to share in his creation. and never be separated from it. And that's something Catholics have to know and bring to heart. So anyway, back to college, chemical engineering. There was 100 of us who started my freshman year, and only 20 of us who graduated. And I learned, very quickly in my second, third year, even though I was dating, a stunningly beautiful Catholic girl who I'd met at one of our fraternity parties, who we quickly learned there was only 2 devout Catholics at this huge party that was going around. So I made this beautiful Swiss girl who could speak 5 languages fluently, by the way, my dream, the dream of my life. But the problem was, by the time of my last year there, it was so difficult. I had to give her up. So almost a year, I had to give her up my last year of college just to graduate. It was that serious. And by the time I caught up with her, she was engaged to somebody else. So that's kind of the way it goes sometimes.
Man, that's a tough one to hear, Tom. But I'm sure that was a difficult discernment to make. And tell us. I mean, when you discern something that big, there's a lot of young people listening, even older people listening, that have big decisions to make, big discernments. Any advice, prayerfully? How do you discern a big decision like that?
Yeah, first of all, there's a huge drug problem, as you know, Jim, and I'm sure the listeners, especially young listeners, know. The death rate, especially in the young population of drugs, is just horrendous. And it's obvious that there's got to be an extremely strict measure, that we bring on ourselves. And just like my Southern Baptist friends would shame me, would shun me if I was ever to even think about doing that, we've got to do that amongst ourselves in a much bigger way. It's that and good leadership that just clamp down on incorrect laws and that type of thing that lead to the drug problem we have now. Let me tell you, India and China, the greatest population of the world, they see what's going on over here, and they see the insanity of it. And they have no drug problem. And how is that? Because they know that they cannot have the manufacturing powerhouse they have with a bunch of potheads. It's quite simple. And we cannot have the manufacturing powerhouse that we need to further develop this country if we stay a bunch of potheads. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. I think of the verses in Scripture about being sober-minded. All right, let's stay close to the Lord. Let's be sober-minded. Let's let Him guide us, and we will be faithful to His guidance. All right, awesome. So, moving forward, Tom, share with us a little bit about your work as you moved forward, and then I'd like to get into also some of what we're going to be talking about next time, and sort of what led you into that. But first, I guess anything that you want to share in terms of leading you from being a student into going fully into work life.
Yeah, going into work life, I pretty much, with that background in nuclear power plants, 2 of the state-of-the-art plants, and DuPont on my resume, I pretty much had no trouble finding a job with exactly what I wanted. I knew I didn't want to work with a big company, and I started right away with a company, also president, founded by an MIT-trained chemical engineer who was making the raw material, the main raw material for body armor, and also the reinforcement for grinding wheels, that type of thing. And it was all what's called pre-preg based. And all that means is pre-preg, it's a short for pre-impregnated fabric. And in most cases, the fabric was fiberglass, open weave fiberglass. And these phenolic resin impregnated fiberglass fabrics would be used as the main reinforcement in grinding wheels and that type of thing, but also body armor. And this company, they were involved with every possible plastic you can imagine in pre-preg form. And that background there led and opened up a whole bunch of new opportunities. Those of you that fly some of the latest Boeing aircraft, you might be familiar with the Dreamliner, the 787 Dreamliner. Well, half the unfueled weight of that 787 is composite, carbon fiber composite. And how do they make these carbon fiber composite? They need prepreg. They use pre-impregnated carbon fibers that are saturated with a resin, and then they cure that resin to make the fuselage, the tubular cylindrical part of the aircraft. And the 787, I think 100% or nearly 100% of the wings is carbon fiber composite, but the whole aircraft, 50% of it is composite. So you can see where some of the background I had at my initial job, it led to tremendous possibilities. So I spent half of my career in manufacturing, and then I started my own company. And that involved a whole bunch of new opportunities that I won contracts with 4 different NASA centers, Army, Navy, Air Force. I invented a whole bunch of new materials, technologies, and processes for the Air Force and these 4 NASA centers. A lot of the people I would deal with, by the way, the technical people at NASA, were Catholics. Because it takes self-discipline to get those advanced degrees and to work in these areas. And a lot of these NASA employees, these scientists, they love doing what they're doing because they're working on the state of the art, finding things that God's left us to find. We haven't invented anything. None of us have invented anything. We're here just finding things that God has left us to find to make life better, for humanity.
Yeah. And at the same time, God has also called you into some other work outside of your primary field of work, to put forth some very important aspects of reality that many people want to distort or ignore or whatever. But you've noticed these things, and you want to be a champion for them and making sure that others understand these truths and how things work. One of these areas is the work of Dr. Joseph Nicolosi, who has published books such as Reparative Therapy of Male Homosexuality, Healing Homosexuality, A Parent's Guide to Preventing Homosexuality. This is a very controversial field, but very important field, especially when we have just the push for total distortion in this area in our culture right now and for many years now. So how did you come to be introduced to this work? And then tell us the story of how that happened and how you sensed this calling that you needed to be an advocate for this work.
Okay, I'll try to give you the Cliff Notes version here. There was a partial birth abortion congressman in New Hampshire, and I was serving as a lector in my church, one of the biggest churches in Nashua, New Hampshire, for many years. And I heard about this guy, and he was up for election, and I just knew I had to do something about it. So I heard he was going to give a speech at a VFW right there in Nashua, and he said he would answer every question, as long as we would put the question in writing and put it in this box or whatever. So I wrote up as many questions as I possibly could to try to bring up the insanity of this partial birth abortion, which he was fostering. And there was another gentleman there who I didn't know at the time, a Lieutenant Colonel Dan Hogan, who has probably done more in New Hampshire in pro-life areas and activities than anyone else I know. Well, he quickly was doing the exact same thing that I was doing, stuffing this box with questions to try to expose this congressman. To make a long story short, it was a kind of a brawl afterwards, and I saw this man, surrounded by 5 hecklers, and he was taking on all 5 of them, and I quickly realized that he was on the pro-life side, so I drew off 2 of the 5, and he had no trouble handling him. He was smaller in stature, but he didn't back down, and so anyway, I took 2 of them and calmed them down, and things kind of broke up without a fist fight. But I met him afterwards, and we became, almost best friends afterwards. And he taught me all about the pro-life movement. And we quickly realized that we had to go after a major cause of a lot of this that started about 70 years ago with a guy by the name of Alfred Kinsey. okay, who's basically a homosexualist who tried to normalize his own behavior with a book he wrote, Sexuality in the Human Male, that came out around 1950. And he's the one that claimed that 10% of the American population was homosexual.
Yeah, so some very important truths here. We're going to be back to sort some of it out here with Tom Walton. We'll also put the phone number out as soon as we get back to give you a chance to get a question into Tom if you'd like today. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Hi, I'm Debbie Georgiani.
And I'm Adam Bly.
Join us for the Spirit World on the Station of the Cross.
If we're really going to suffer, we really need to suffer here when we're in the church militant phase, right?
The most difficult part for the poor soul is that they had some amount of that beatific vision in their judgment. They know they're going to get back to God, but then they're separated from God. So that's kind of the worst part because that's a spiritual suffering.
The Spirit World, every Saturday at 11 a.m., right here on the Station of the Cross.
What you're offering and giving to me, you deserve to get back because you're offering more than I can give.
I learned so much through the Station on the Cross. I listen to the radio station daily, and I absolutely love it.
I was attending the chapel and places like that, and through your programs, I was able to find out how other Protestants had come back into the Catholic Church. God bless the Station of the Cross.
Donate today at thestationofthecross.com.
Here at the Station of the Cross, we proudly bring the truths of the Catholic faith to countless listeners through radio and mobile devices, and we're grateful for the feedback we've received.
I discovered the Station of the Cross rather providentially a year ago and have been a loyal listener ever since. I can't overestimate the value of the station, what it's made a difference in my life in terms of making me better informed Catholic. It has enriched my faith and told me during tough times and made me laugh on several occasions. I commend the important work of this great apostolate.
I'm a stay-at-home mom. I listen to the radio, and if I can listen to something that brings me closer to God, closer to Jesus Christ, then it's the most beautiful thing.
If you've been blessed by listening to the Station of the Cross, let us know. Call 1-877-888-6279, extension 112. Then share your testimonial with us.
The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with Testimony Tuesday. Guest today, Tom Walton. He is a Catholic engineer, inventor, advanced materials business founder, and incubator. If you want to get a question in for Tom today, now is your chance to do so. 1-877-511-5483. That's 1-877-511-5483. And just one thing to notice here about Tom, obviously he's got a robust work life as an engineer, an inventor, a business owner, and yet, look, he's still entering into some form of apostolic work, some form of spreading the faith, spreading the truth into the culture beyond what his primary work is. He's open to that. And then when God is prompting him, he says yes to that, and he is active in that way. That's a very powerful example for all of us to see and to reflect on, that that's an aspect of who we are that we really do need to be open to. And so we're talking in the past segment, the last segment a little bit, and now I want to move into it here once more. Dr. Joseph Nicolosi, in his works, now he did die in 2017. May perpetual light shine upon him, and we can't interview him, but we do have interviews that he did, and we have that audio. And so on Monday, we are going to be back with Tom, and we're going to dive deeper into the work of Dr. Joseph Nicolosi. We're going to bring forth some of those clips, kick them around, open the phone lines. So that's coming up on Monday. But for now, just hearing more about Tom, the story of how you came to know about Dr. Joseph Nicolosi and his work, and how you understood that this is something that you had to help get out there.
Yes. Yeah, I have to mention my friend Colonel Hogan, because again, without his friendship and him teaching me about what was going on here, I never would have got into this. And Colonel Hogan, by the way, he flew nearly 300 combat missions in Vietnam, flying F-5s, the supersonic F-5s, and a lot of his his fellow pilots did not survive Vietnam in that. And one thing he taught me from a lot of that is he was harassed by professionals, with these SAM missiles they were sending up all the time. And that's the way we have to look at when we're attacked. We've already been harassed by professionals. So anything else is easy stuff. And you encountered that in Boston. That Antifa group that was there in Boston, you may not have known, and I learned this from working with Students for Life because they're attacked all the time. Antifa only goes after the most successful of the pro-life groups. So it's obvious, Jim, your Men's March is now the top target of them. And that's a badge of honor you should wear. But also know that there was at least 3 different tag teams. They were very well organized. They're very highly paid. But just knowing that they're there to discourage you, you take that and you just go in there with joy, and you're not discouraged. You do not be discouraged. And you've already faced the worst. You've already been harassed by professionals. So do not be discouraged. So anyway, Colonel Hogan introduced me to Dr. Judith Reisman, who I developed a personal contact with. And it was Dr. Judith Reisman who actually exposed Kinsey. We wouldn't know about Kinsey's insanity unless it was for this woman. Unfortunately, she passed away a few years ago. Mm-hmm. But it's her work also that helped spur me on. Again, from Colonel Hogan also introduced me and teaching me about her work. And it was a pro-life rally that Colonel Hogan and I went to at the Diocesan Cathedral in Manchester, the yearly pro-life rally, that I noticed at one of the tables there was a book. And the book there was Dr. Joseph Nicolosi, and also it had the original edition had his wife as the co-author, A Parent's Guide to Preventing Homosexuality. Now notice the new edition does not have his wife's name, but it's my understanding from the family and actually talking to Joe Jr. On November 7th that his mother had a huge part in making that book easy to read, taking Joe's technical terms and turning it into a book that an eighth grader could read and understand. And that's the whole idea, to try to prevent homosexuality by teaching parents how to be the right parents. Because you could be overlooking things that can be very easily overlooked, that can actually cause a child to deviate toward this disorder. And these are disorders. They're not spiritual disorders. They are psychological disorders. That's very important to understand. And as a psychiatrist from our own church, my own church, I'll call him Dr. K, told me that particular psychological disorder, that same-sex attraction disorder, that allows for opening up a wide door for demonic attack. But that comes after the psychological disorder. Now, we who like the opposite sex, we have a door that's open for demonic attack too. But it's my understanding that door for those with same-sex attraction, it's much wider, and it allows for a much more serious demonic attack.
Yeah, when we do get back together on the Monday show regarding Dr. Joseph Nicolosi's work, we are going to get into those details of some of those points that parents really need to understand. That's what we're really going to try to bring out, the practical points of all of his work, at least as much as we can cover, that folks I think will really find very helpful, and really they make a lot of sense when you start to have these things laid out before you. Again, there's a way it works, and there's a way disorder works, and there's a way that trauma works, and there's a way that that good virtue works, and all of these things. I also want to just point out there are a couple books to be mindful of if you want to learn more about the nonsense, the lies, the errors, the evil with regard to Alfred Kinsey that was so influential in his time and still is influential in our time, even though it's been totally debunked as garbage science. It's still pushed, though, in many quarters. There is the book by Dr. Reisman, Sexual Sabotage. So that's one good book. There's also a book called The Kinsey Corruption, an expose on the most influential in quotes, scientist of our time. So that is an important area to study and understand as well. But Tom, I guess anything further on this, the work of Dr. Joseph Nicolosi that you want to share with us today in terms of, look, he was canceled before anybody heard the word cancel culture and all of this. They took his books off of Amazon. The culture doesn't want to hear from him or to validate his work in any way. They want to discredit him in every way. But you're a man you're an objective, sober-minded man. As you look at his work, I guess, what was your sense as you first saw it laid out?
Yeah, one thing I notice in all the best scientists that I've been privileged to work with, there's a sense of frankness, a total honesty that comes across in a great scientist. But that also means at the expense of tact. And this turns a lot of people off. It's not easy to tell the truth. And that's what I noticed from observing Dr. Nicolosi. I noticed this sense of joy. And I've been very privileged to, from some of my inventions, you get this incredible sense of joy when you find something that nobody else has found, and it's something that God's left us to find, in God's own handiwork. And I'm sure this is something that he came across because he studied over 1,000 cases, Jim. Okay, he saw the same patterns repeat over and over again. And then I learned just recently, he actually was contracted to work at St. John's Seminary in Maryland back in the late 70s and 80s. And we can get into that a little bit further. But he actually was supposed to he was actually trying to figure out what are the better candidates for the priesthood at this seminary. And he, at that time, did not want to have certain candidates released from into priesthood.
Yeah, Tom Walton's going to be back with us next Monday on this. In the meantime, josephnicolosi.com to learn more about his good work. And let's close it out with some scripture here. 1 Peter 5:8. Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Lord have mercy.